Let's finish chapter 4 today. We're discussing in chapters 4 and 5 the extension of sin through the human race. We're looking at the manifest sinfulness of the human race in Adam's first son, Cain, in chapter 4. I think we just working down through verses 14 there, 13 and 14, Cain's punishment. In the discussion that Cain was having with the Lord graciously intervened on his case in verse 15 and said unto him, Therefore, whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. This is a gracious gesture on God's part. Sevenfold vengeance. It does introduce us to a principle that God is the ultimate judge, and that when God extends grace to a person, he doesn't give people the freedom to violate that. What the mark was, we have no idea. God's grace certainly did not annul his previous judgment. I want you to notice that as a key point. God's grace to Cain in this instance did not annul his justice. You may run into the idea in talking to some people that they think that God is such a good God that how could a loving God send people to hell forever and ever and ever? How do you do that? Well, he's a holy God. And his holiness has to be, if he ceases to be holy, then he ceases to be changeless. He ceases to be God. And so he has decreed that the wages of sin is death, and that that he will pass sentence and pass judgment on the evil people. Now, why God didn't kill Cain here, I don't know. It's not until Genesis chapter 9 that the death penalty for killing people is actually instituted in the Bible. I don't know why it wasn't, it's a mystery to me why God didn't just kill Cain. Unless the Bible is giving us an illustration of the grace of God. Right? Cain's punishment was like a living death. It's like living with the knowledge of what he had done and living under the God's curse as a fugitive, not being able to raise food out of the ground, which is the only trade he had. Like God just said, okay, you're a hitchhiker from now on, you gotta live like a crow. Live off the ground.
Maybe he did it so like other people could see living memory.
Perhaps.
It's just dead and gone. Sleeping had a fat point.
Well, God wouldn't, he may have committed that. Wasn't Cain, wasn't it, I don't know what the Mormons don't they? Through Cain?
That's why
That's the mark.
Yes,
Okay. That's a gem of a doctrine, isn't it?
that's what he said. But also he says sin will roll over you. Also.
Um, the thought just occurred to me that perhaps, like, what would have happened, all things being equal with what we know already from the biblical text, what would have happened if God had killed Cain? Who would have been left? Adam and Eve, and perhaps a few daughters. Right? And then Seth would have been born, like all things being equal. If you just remove Cain out of the picture, there are no descendants from Cain. And it was the Cainitic civilization that became so wicked that God intervened and produced a flood. Right? And so God's purposes in the flood would not have been fulfilled if Cain had simply been killed like that.
Everyone else said God repented of what he'd done. Something. God didn't like who it was. Anyways, he regretted what he'd done.
What? In the flood?
He let him in. But he was saying he didn't like his creation. He didn't care for the way it was.
Right. It repented of the Lord that he had made man on the earth and grieved in his heart. It says it. 6:6.
What's repentance mean? Feel sorry for.
Well, I think it has a variety of meanings.
But it means for God to
I don't think it does. Anyways, it's makes for an interesting discussion to ask yourself, why didn't God just kill Cain? Why did he keep him alive? At any rate, it's very evident that by simply allowing Cain to live, that was a demonstration of divine grace, and his justice was not annulled by his grace. Now we get to verse 16, and we see Cain's degeneracy. Cain's degeneracy. Says that Cain went out from the presence of the Lord. That's the same phrase you see in Jonah chapter 1 verse 3, that Jonah went out from the presence of the Lord. Okay? What does this mean? Well, voluntary separation from God, broken fellowship. Certainly. The word presence in the Hebrew actually means face. He went out from the face of the Lord. You can never get away actually from the presence of the Lord. The book of Habakkuk, or is it Habakkuk or Zephaniah? I forget which one. I was noticing, I think it's Zephaniah. Talks about that the Lord is in the midst of his people. It says in Zephaniah 3:5, the just Lord is in the midst of her, that is, in the midst of Jerusalem and Judah. He will not do iniquity. Every morning doth he bring his justice to light, he faileth not. But the unjust knoweth no shame. That's Zephaniah 3:5. So even where people are sinning, God is in the midst of those people. All right? And another reference to the same thing. That the Lord is in the midst of his people for blessing too. Can't find it now. Oh yes, Zephaniah 3:15. The Lord has taken away thy judgments, he has cast out thine enemy, the king of of Israel, even the Lord is in the midst of thee, though thou shalt not see evil anymore. Thou shalt not see evil anymore. Lockyer's two-part outline to the book of Zephaniah, which we didn't get to last night, was the Lord is in the midst of his people for judgment. He's in the midst of his people for blessing. That's a good outline of the book of Zephaniah. It stresses that God is always there. You can actually never, in reality, go out from the presence of the Lord. That's what Psalm 139 is all about. Where can I go from thy presence? If I take the wings of the morning, if I go to the farthest part of the sea, if I go into the blackness of midnight, and in the belly of the earth, behold, thou art there. And it's a good cross-reference. This does not mean that he actually successfully ran away from God. It says he went out from God's face. And then it says he dwelt in the land of Nod. Most of my students live there.
I was waiting for that.
It's not pronounced Nod, it's Nod in the Hebrew, which means flight or exile. It comes from the verb nud, that means to be removed and agitated, to wander. Right? It kind of is a picture of the prodigal son, that he was wandering around from here to there. He was agitated. No stability. It says it's on the east of Eden, wherever that was. It doesn't say China. Right? So he went out from the presence of the Lord. This is indicating Cain's degeneracy. Isn't it interesting that when Adam sinned, he hid from God? When Cain sinned, he wandered from God. Strong parallels here. You can run references in the Bible to the phrase "the presence of the Lord," and you'll find that it actually means the presence of the Lord is a place of rest. It's a place of glory and honor. It's a place of help and prayer. It's a place of fear. That is reverence. It's a place of full joy. All of those references, there are references that indicate that in the presence of the Lord there is those things. There are those things. And so for Cain to go out from the presence of the Lord simply means that he just left fellowship with God and adopted a hopeless lifestyle. This does not mean that he couldn't have fellowship on an earthly level with other people. Now, we come to one of the interesting statements in the Bible in verse 17 to 24, describing Cain's descendants. Verse 17 describes their origins. Where did Cain's descendants come from? Anybody? They came from Cain and his wife, who had to have been not necessarily. It wasn't his mother, okay, it was either his sister or a niece or a cousin. Right? If we draw, you have Adam and Eve, they had Abel, who died, and then you have Cain, and then the Bible says in Genesis chapter 5 that they had sons and daughters. Okay, we also know that they had Seth and daughters. Okay. Now, it's possible that there were other sons, besides the ones that are mentioned. Not likely, but it's possible. So, out of necessity, since this is the only pair for human reproduction, that Seth would have married his sister as well. I mean, to start out, they had to, somebody had to marry a sister, right? And then they had, right? And if there was another brother that's not mentioned in the scriptures, sons and daughters, if there is an unknown one, then he too would have married his sister and would have had, right? And then it's possible for some of these to get together with these, right? Now in relationship to Cain, this is his niece. If he went this way, this is his sister. And if he went this way, what does that mean? What's a cousin? Cousin
Yeah, this would be a cousin.
Is a cousin always a descendant of your uncle?
Those two down there would be cousins. The joined that group. They started that group.
The brother Cain would be her great uncle.
Right, so this would still make it a niece. It would still make it a removed niece. Yeah, so this would still be a niece. Okay. So the only possibilities then is that he either married a sister or a first generation niece or a second or third generation niece. Right? There's no problem with that. I mean, that's the possibilities. The only possibility. Question.
Well, people seem to have horrors of that. But it wasn't even until later on in the Bible that was told, basically, that it stopped for that. Also, Adam and Eve, she was flesh of his flesh. No, let's say a pure line.
Well, okay.
If the Eve maybe said.
Morris has pointed out that, number one, you said there was no prohibition against it in Scripture at this point.
No.
Secondly, the curse had only had the opportunity to corrupt the human race, including the genetic, right, the genes of the gene pool that everyone had at that time. The curse only had existed for a few years, right? And so you wouldn't have near the latent problems that you have this late in human history, when the gene pool has been corrupted for millennia of time, right? So, physiologically speaking, the problem would have been very minimal, very slight, sure, right? And thirdly, it's the only possibility. I mean, it had to happen, so it had to start out that way.
Well, as my Stars has a friend that's telling her, she says, until you tell me where Cain got his wife, I am not going to believe the Bible. Stars, well, you got problems. Stars, there's only one way you got his wife. But I said, maybe two ways.
Okay, so it either had to be a sister or a niece, and it could have very likely been a niece, because these people lived for great periods of time. It doesn't tell us how old Cain was when he died.
No.
But we know that on the Sethite side, that people lived hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, right? And so the fact that we have longevity of life shows that the curse itself wasn't the same on the human race as it is today. And so, well, let's face it, you and I are all related. My wife and I are related if you go back far enough. We're all relatives. It's just a matter of degree today. You go back far enough and the clock line meets up with the McLeod line somewhere back there. And so it's the same question. It's a no-no. You shouldn't marry anybody. If you can't handle this, you shouldn't get married. Because you'll be doing the same thing. A few more generations involved. Okay. Now, that's all I'm going to say about that. The origin of Cain's descendants had to have been his sister or a niece or a removed niece. It says Cain knew his wife, she conceived and bore Enoch, and he builded a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. And to Enoch was born Irad, and Irad begot Mehujael. Mehujael begot Methushael. Methushael begot Lamech. And Lamech took unto him 2 wives. The name of the one was Adah, and the name of the other Zillah. And Adah bore Jabal. He was the father of such as dwell in tents, and of such as had cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father of all such as handled the harp and pipe. And Zillah, she also bore Tubal Cain, an instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron. And the sister of Tubal Cain was Naamah. Lamech said unto his wives, Adah and Zillah, Hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech. Hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man who wounded me, and who had been a relative, and a young man for hurting me. If Cain shall be avenged 7-fold, truly Lamech 70 and 7-fold. Now, in these verses, we have their place. Obviously, they lived in a city called Enoch, named after Cain and his wife's first child. I just want to point out that you should be careful not to confuse the Enoch of chapter 4 with the Enoch of chapter 5. You should not confuse the Lamech of chapter 4 with the Lamech of chapter 5. Well, there's an Enoch in chapter 5 as well. That's in the Sethite line. 5:18 refers to the birth of Enoch, the son of Jared. This is Enoch, the son of Cain.
Yeah, the name.
And Lamech in chapter 4 is the son of Methushael. In chapter 5, Lamech I thought there was a Lamech in chapter 5. Yes, in verse 25, Lamech is the son of Methuselah. And several of those names are very similar. Now, what we are given here is the history of the first civilization in the world. The history of the world's earliest civilization, down to the 6th generation. What was the world's earliest civilization like? Describe it.
Cool. In the city. People in there that played music and others that worked on craft, iron, stuff like that.
Okay, they weren't cave dwellers, they were builders, right? They were a social people, not animals. Okay. Secondly, they were musicians. They had musicians. They had tradesmen. Specifically, metallurgists. They had, it was also an agrarian society, agricultural base. It was a combination of industry. We're talking about basic industry here. Not industry in the sense that we know of. This would be like cottage industry. But yes, these people developed, metallurgists developed the art of smelting metals. Right? There was still an agrarian base because you have nomadic herdsmen. Right? One son says here, he was the father of all such that dwell in tents and of such as have cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father of all such as handle the harp and pipe. Right? So you have musicians and people that create musical instruments as well. Bronze and iron. Okay? Bronze and iron. This is interesting. According to the Bible, Adam and Eve are the first generation. And then in the second generation, you've got Abel and Cain, Seth, and daughters, right? And then the next within the next 4 or 5 generations, this is number 1, number 2, and then 3 to 6. In the next few generations of people, you have people in the Bronze Age. And iron, using bronze and iron. Now this is completely contrary to what you will get about ancient world history based on evolutionary theory. I don't even know. It's been so long since I heard their breakdown, but they have a Neolithic. Do any of you remember this from school? Do you remember your geologic, not just your geologic timetable, but how do they classify the ages of humanity, of human history? Okay?
They said they existed, but we didn't know.
Bronze Age and the Iron Age, right? And they relegate these people back to, I don't know, the middle, like the England, ancient England, like the Celts, right? The Celtic peoples. This is Bronze Age.
Yeah, they don't time.
The Bible says that right from the very beginning, these people had bronze and iron.
There's different places to be.
Well, that's true. Well, we're talking here about the Middle East, the Fertile Crescent, right? This civilization was also degenerate. Not only did it have these highly civilized qualities, but it also, we have the example of the first polygamy. Yes. First polygamy, what else? Right? Violent. Example, murder. Now, I remember reading something one time in Morris, I can't remember what he said about that verse, where he says, I have slain a man to my wounding, or who wounded me. What does that mean? What does Morris say about it?
Well, he brought up as if that he was brave enough to mention it, but he only mentions it in his stand for his wives.
So, yeah, lack of justice. Okay. You have vigilante-style justice here, so it's lack of real justice. And it was this world that produced the generation that God destroyed in the flood. Right? So here's the basic characteristics of the Cainitic civilization. Very advanced technologically, but basically corrupt at the core, morally, spiritually. Okay? This brings us to chapter 4, verse 25 through the end of chapter 5, 532. And here we have separation manifest through Adam's third son, Seth. Separation manifests through Adam's third son, Seth. Seth's parents are mentioned in 25.
What do you mean by separation?
Well, hold your horses and it will become evident. Godliness. Rather than degeneracy evident in the Cainitic civilization, there is godliness. Right? Separation from sin. Yes? Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son, and he called his name Shaith. Actually, Shaith. For God, said she, has appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. And to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he called his name Enosh. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. So the chapter 4 that begins with a murder and introduces us to the first ancient civilization in human history closes with a revival. But it doesn't come through Cain, it comes through Seth. Okay? So Adam's parents, Seth's parents are Adam and Eve, once again, the same sin-cursed progenitors that produced Cain, which therefore tells us that Seth himself was necessarily under this curse and he was just as sinful. Romans 5:12, by one man sin entered into the world, so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. And we know that Seth died. In chapter 5, verse 8, it says, and he died. Okay, so he was a sinner. Right? He was born with no more or no less of the curse than Cain had, but he turned out different. His name in 25b in the Hebrew is actually Shaith, which means placing or setting in the stead of another. It comes from the Hebrew verb sheath, that means to place or put. And Eve alludes to this. She named him Shaith because God has appointed, that is, he has placed or set another in the place of. I suppose the most colloquial word I could think of to describe Seth is that he was Cain's replacement. That's what it actually means. He was Cain's replacement. Pardon? Abel's, I'm sorry. Abel's replacement. And as such, can you know of anybody else in human history that was a replacement? For an evil progenitor? Christ. Christ was Adam's replacement. And so Seth was Abel's replacement. And as such, there's a parallel between Christ and Seth. God intervened in human history here in this child and provided an individual through whom there would come help. In fact, if you go to Luke chapter 3 and verse 38, notice what it says. We should start with verse 23. Jesus himself began to be about 30 years of age, being of Joseph, who was the son of Heli, who was the son of Matthat, the son of Levi, the son of Melchi, Jannai, Joseph, Matthias, Amos, Nahum, Esli, Nagai, and so forth. We come down to verse 37 in the line. He's going backwards. Who was the son of Methuselah, the son of Enoch, the son of Jared, the son of Mahalalel, who was the son of Canaan, who was the son of Enos, who was the son of Seth, who was the son of Adam, who was the son of God. Christ's own genealogy traces through Seth. Interesting, eh? 337 and 8. Now the importance of Seth. From 426 to 5:5. A spiritual revival followed his birth. That is, in the days of his first son. After he was born and after he matured, obviously, what we are not told here, and some of you people ought to be authors, you ought to write books when you get older, more mature, get your education.
Sure.
Why don't you do a fictional story on the life of Seth? Imagine what it must have been like growing up and hearing about your brother getting murdered and your older brother still alive, and he's a real raunch character, and all your cousins, all your nephews and your nieces through this guy, they're all rotten, godless people. Doesn't it sound a lot like today? You could make it a practical terrible. And yet, while you're hearing all this, Seth listens to his parents tell about what it was like to have fellowship with God and why they sinned and what God did for them. And so Seth develops faith in God. There's no question. He was a believer. And when he became married, likewise to a distant relative, his son Enosh. It was after he matured that people began to call upon the name of the Lord. And what's not stated is that it must have been because of some, he must have had something to do with this revival. I want to note also the significant relationship that Seth had to his father. Let's read the first 5 verses. This is the book of the generations of Adam in the day that God created man. In the likeness of God made he him. Male and female created he them and blessed them and called their name Adam in the day when they were created. And Adam lived 130 years. And begot a son in his own likeness, after his image, and called his name Seth. The days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years. And he begot sons and daughters. And all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. All the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Right? So let's put it on a timeline here. And you should always do this when you're doing Bible study. Adam starts at year 0, and he died at year 930. How old was he when he had Seth? 130. It's way up here. Seth born. This is Adam created. Seth born. And says he begot sons and daughters after Seth. So, but it says that he had sons and daughters after Seth. Now, we may deduce from that that the sons were born after Cain had his wife. Not necessarily, but you know, if Cain waited a long time before he got married, it's possible that he married some, descendant of one of his own nephews.
Well, it couldn't wait that long. Does it give an age or anything on him?
No, it doesn't give us any age or dates or anything for Cain. Right? All right, so the significant relationship that Seth had to his father. He had the same father that Cain did. His own father was divinely created and blessed and named. That's unique. My father was created out of the dust of the ground. So he had a unique father, and he was born when when Adam was 130. Seth was in the image and likeness of Adam, physically and spiritually as well. Adam was, I think, a man of faith. We discussed this when we were in chapter 3. And Cain lacked these spiritual qualities. Instead of faith, he had, spiritual willfulness. And evidently, Seth was like his dad. Right? It says here in verse 3 that Adam begot a son in his own likeness and after his image. He was just like his dad. Right? Some people have drawn a contrast here. Genesis 5:3 talks about Adam begetting a son in Adam's own image and likeness. Adam was created in God's image and likeness, and something was affected. Something about that image and likeness was affected and cursed, because now he was a dying creature. God isn't that way. He's mortal and corruptible. Now, in some way, the image and likeness of Adam and Eve were corrupted and made mortal, but they still have image. Because we read in Genesis chapter 9 that when God instituted the death penalty for capital crimes, he said, whosoever sheds blood, by man shall his blood be shed, because he has destroyed someone who is made in the image of God. So God's divine image continues on, however it's been affected by the curse. And yet, when Adam begot his son, it doesn't say he begot him in God's image. He begot his own image in life. So Genesis 5:3 is one of those basic text passages that teaches